Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing with Grandma. Welcome back. Today I wanted to do a little demonstration in watercolor over this little graphite study that we did of this bird. I've drawn this bird maybe 3 or 4 times. So one of the sketches I decided I wanted to do a simple watercolor wash over it as a short little study. So right now I'm going to lay in a reddish brown tone over all of him, and then I'll pick up the excess so that it leaves little glimmers of the paper and some variation of dark to light tones, which is very unique to watercolor. While I'm working, I like the brush to create some of the textures that we see on the feathers and the uniqueness of the animal that we're doing. And in this case, I've already established a lot of the line and texture of the feathers and the emphasis on his body that I want to make the main focus. So right now I want to establish a very light study of the cast shadow underneath him. And with cast shadows, they are often very strong, hard-edged, but you do want the edges to be soft so that it looks a little bit more natural. So I just put a light blue-gray underneath him, and then I'll build the value closer to him so it adds more contrast. Now we can go with a little bit of detail on those eyes and the beak where we want the focal point to be. And I do use these small brushes when I'm doing a small study like this, but I prefer the larger brushes. This requires a little bit of a more detailed touch for these edges. So I'm going to use this small brush to work on some line work, some delicate hairs, and the edges of some of those feathers, and of course that beautiful little head and tail that required a little bit more structure. So all of the marks should move naturally the way that the design is already established, and so it actually helps to have a drawing underneath, because then the painting is just fun and you're just developing it further. So it's just my preferred technique in doing small watercolor studies. So we're just going to add a little bit more detail and some beautiful hints of reddish browns and yellow browns for final touches on this little guy. I wanted also to return to a drawing that I did a few weeks ago of a heron. I was talking about John James Audubon, the famous naturalist illustrator who lived almost 200 years ago, I think. And he was just such a well-known artist and remains so today as one of the best capturer of birds in their natural habitat, and he has just beautiful paintings and illustrations of every kind of bird you can imagine. I would go to the library and see if you could find one of his books of his paintings, but I like to study some of his works because they're so accurate. The last heron I did was for one of John James Audubon's studies. This one is a photo from the internet that is free for us to use. And as you can see, I started with the oval of the head. I had to find the placement of the beak in order to find the placement of the eye. And now I want to give him some form before I work on that eye detail, because I just need to make sure that everything is placed right, that the angle of that neck turn is correct. They're so elegant and so beautiful, but it's important to get those things placed in the main body shape of the animal you're working on before going to the detail too quickly. But I think it's correct, so now I'm going to lay in the dark values in the eye, the pupil, and then try to get that brow as it leads me into the beak shape that is built right into his head. Just amazing. His beak is quite long and thin, so it's always tempting to make them a little bit wider than they should be. And then there's this nice base underneath his chin that I will probably have to thin out a little bit, but we'll see. All the feathers that you're working on or the little hairs, again, the pencil techniques that you use really request that you angle your pencil markings the way the hair and feathers would lie. It just adds so much more of a natural quality to your drawings. So really pay attention to the unique surface and texture of that animal itself as you make your decisions for how your lines will be structured. He does have some black markings on the right side of his neck, but I don't really know if they are common to this breed only, or if it's all of these kinds of herons. He's got a beautiful angle to the neck there that leads right to his back, and then in a moment you will see me develop wing structure. But just some nice feathery marks helps to add to the quality of his elegance. I don't want to outline this bird. I want everything to be done with value, and it just gives softer edges, which helps to create the form more naturally. I'm just going to thin out the tip of that beak and the cheek area, which is a little bit lighter. And here he is, finished study. This one is going to be one of my favorite. I love rabbits. And I know we did one a couple of lessons ago, but I loved this cute little pose of this brown bunny. So we start with the oval, and then within the oval, we find his cheek shape. And first I want to establish where the base of the ear is, and then I follow that line down to place his eye and where that nose is. So all of that kind of aligns up, and then I kind of build out of that oval the unique shape of the bunny. So these ears, one is in front of the other, so I'm going to place the one that's closest to me first on this side of his head, and then in a moment I'll place the second one. But I need to build out and correct that placement of the ear, and then begin creating some shadow so that his head looks more dimensional rather than just flat lines. So let's place the other ear now and make sure that it looks like it's tucked behind there and they're both standing straight up. Okay, now I think I have the basic shapes correct. Now I'm going to go in and do some shading and to build some hairs. He has patches of really dark hair and then some lighter colored hairs around his eyes and on the edge of his cheeks. So hopefully those will show up. I'm going to build his shoulder and his chest there and establish some soft values. So I want to make the focal point, of course, his eye. So I would need to be sure that the placement of the pupil is right, that the that nice rim around his eye is correct. They have little white patches around their eyes, and it helps to form that shape. I want his expression to be gentle, so I want to be sure I have a nice arch on his eye. Of course, they have whiskers, and I might have made those lines a little strong, so I'm going to erase those out a little bit. A little bit of shadow to accent the light area around his eyes. Add some unique hair. Now that I have that established, I'm going to go even to more detail and to really try to create a sense of his hairy head and darken those lines, add some detail, some tiny little lines around his cute little mouth, and just focus on little areas that will help make it look more realistic. And you follow the pattern of the hairs so that they lay in the right direction, and that helps with that illusion. So I kind of follow a pattern of how I direct my lines. I can use my eraser as well to create some of those hairs. And so I like to use this little school eraser, which I think is one of the best for artists. It just helps to get fine lines, and it's pretty effective for certain textures of animals, so I like these basic erasers. So I'm just gonna take out some of those highlights to make sure that I'm cleaning him up a little bit and focusing on the areas that are really white. He's got a little gleam in his eye that I want to be sure to capture. And just little touch-ups. I really enjoy doing the details in my drawings. A little bit of detail can go a long way to add interest to your drawings. Just a little bit more. Little bit more. So I want to show you the finished drawing in a moment, but the final touches are just those hairs around his eyes to make sure that I have that as my focal point, his expression, and then to make sure I separate those ears a little bit too. There's one behind the other. So I want to touch those up, add some details. Again, some of the edges will show some small little hints of hair around his head, and that will just add interest and more of a realistic appearance. And again, a little bit of eraser just to make his fluff natural looking. So here's the finished piece. Thank you for joining me here today with Drawing and Painting with Grandma at A Touch of Blue Studio.